I can still feel the weight of the rock in my hand, the blood trickling through my fingers, warm and sticky. This wasn't how I imagined things would end, but after years of enduring hell inside my own home, something inside me just broke. My father lying on the floor, motionless. My brother, for the first time in his life, looking at me with fear in his eyes. And I just felt a strange relief, as if I could finally breathe. I want you to understand how a normal kid ended up like this, how I reached this point. My name is Andrew. I'm 19 years old now. I spent the last 2 years in a juvenile detention center. I got out 3 months ago. I'm sitting in this empty park because sometimes it's the only place where I can organize my thoughts. People look at me and see only a criminal, a murderer. Yes, I killed my father, but the story nobody knows is everything that happened before that day. The world is so quick to judge, isn't it? Boy kills his own father with a rock. It's easy to put a headline like that and move on, but real life isn't a headline. It's years of small moments that accumulate until you can't take it anymore. Nobody asks why a son would do something like that to his own father. Nobody questions what could have happened in that house. Look, I'm not here to apologize or justify what I did. I just want to tell my story, the complete story, because behind every tragedy there's a story that few people know. Maybe you're there on the other side already judging me, thinking that nothing justifies what I did, and maybe you're right. But before you decide, listen to everything until the end. If you're really paying attention to me and want to understand how an ordinary kid reached this extreme point, I need you to like this video now, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, turn on notifications so you don't miss anything from my story, and comment where you're watching this from. I'm serious, I need to know if there's anyone really listening, because throughout my entire life, nobody really listened to me. What I'm about to tell you now will completely change how you see my story. There are details nobody knows, not even the judge who sentenced me. Things that happened inside my house when the doors were closed. The private hell I lived every day. My name is Andrew. I'm 19 years old now. I spent the last 2 years in a juvenile detention center. I got out 3 months ago. I'm sitting in this empty park because sometimes it's the only place where I can organize my thoughts. People look at me and see only a criminal. A murderer? Yes, I killed my father. But the story nobody knows is everything that happened before that day. The world is so quick to judge, isn't it? Boy kills his own father with a rock. It's easy to put a headline like that and move on, but real life isn't a headline. It's years of small moments that accumulate until you can't take it anymore. Nobody asks why a son would do something like that to his own father. Nobody questions what could have happened in that house. Look, I'm not here to apologize or justify what I did. I just want to tell my story, the complete story, because behind every tragedy there's a story that few people know. Maybe you're there on the other side already judging me, thinking that nothing justifies what I did, and maybe you're right. But before you decide, listen to everything until the end. If you're really paying attention to me and want to understand how an ordinary kid reached this extreme point, I need you to like this video now, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts, turn on notifications so you don't miss anything from my story, and comment where you're watching this from. I'm serious, I need to know if there's anyone really listening, because throughout my entire life nobody really listened to me. What I'm about to tell you now will completely change how you see my story. There are details nobody knows, not even the judge who sentenced me. Things that happened inside my house when the doors were closed, the private hell I lived every day. It wasn't always like this. Believe it or not, I had a normal childhood until I was 6 years old. We lived in a simple but quiet neighborhood in the suburbs of Chicago. It was me, my brother Richard, who is 5 years older than me, and my parents. My mother worked as a housekeeper for families, and my father was a truck driver. He spent weeks away hauling freight to other states. When my father was home, things were different. He played with us, took me bike riding in the park, brought presents from his trips. Richard was always his favorite, but I didn't mind much. I thought it was normal. My mother was affectionate, made our favorite lunch on Sundays, helped me with my homework. We were a normal family with normal problems. Everything changed when I was 7 years old. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was fast. In 4 months, she was gone. I remember the funeral, the coffin being lowered, and my father squeezing Richard's shoulder while I stood alone, with nobody to comfort me. It was the first time I realized there was something wrong with the way he treated us. After my mother died, my father started drinking a lot. When he was on the road, it was Richard who took care of me, or at least was supposed to take care of me. At first, it was just normal sibling teasing. He made me do his household chores, kept me from watching TV, ate my share of dessert, kid stuff. But as the months passed, Richard's behavior started changing. He was 12 and I was 7 when he started really hurting me. I remember the first time he twisted my arm until I cried, just because I wouldn't lend him my portable video game. When my father came back from his trip that week, I showed him the bruises. His response marked me forever. "Be a man, Andrew. Learn to defend yourself. Richard's just teaching you to be strong." From that day on, I understood I couldn't count on my father to protect me. He not only ignored what Richard did, but seemed to approve. "This'll make him a real man," he'd tell his friends when they asked about the injuries on my face, as if torturing your own brother was some kind of rite of passage. At school, I tried to hide the bruises, wore long-sleeve shirts even in the heat, made up stories about falling off my bike or getting hurt playing football. A teacher, Mrs. Garcia, suspected something once. She called me after class and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied, said yes. I was afraid of what might happen if I told the truth. And also, who would believe me? The following years kept getting worse. Richard discovered he liked to see me suffer. It wasn't just physical violence, it was psychological too. He killed my hamster when I was 8 years old, simply twisted the animal's neck in front of me and said, "Look what happens to what you love." I cried for days. My father said I was exaggerating, that it was just a rat. When Richard turned 15, he got a motorcycle from my father. I was 10 and got nothing. "You don't deserve presents," my father said. "Richard has good grades, he's strong, he has friends. You just cry in the corners like a little girl." Those words hurt more than any punch from my brother. I tried to get close to other people. An aunt, my mother's cousin, came to visit us when I was 11 years old. She noticed something strange and asked if I wanted to spend some time at her house. Before I could answer, my father intervened. "He's fine here. We don't need anyone meddling in our family." She never came back. At 12 years old, I tried to run away from home for the first time. I grabbed a backpack, put in some clothes and the little money I had saved, and left in the middle of the night. Richard found me 3 blocks away. He dragged me back home, beating me the whole way. When we got there, my father didn't ask why I had tried to run away. He just said, "Next time, Richard, break his leg. That way he can't get far." My mental health started deteriorating rapidly. I had constant nightmares. I started biting my nails until they bled. At school, my grades plummeted. I couldn't concentrate. I lived in a constant state of alertness, always expecting the next attack. The teachers interpreted my behavior as laziness or rebellion. Nobody seemed to notice I was silently begging for help. At 13 years old, Richard, then 18, started bringing friends home. That's when things got even worse. He humiliated me in front of them as a form of entertainment. He made me do humiliating things, like bark like a dog or get on all fours so they could use my back as a table. If I refused, the punishment was much worse after they left. And my father, he watched, sometimes laughed, other times simply ignored it and continued drinking his beer. When Richard hit me in front of him, all he said was, "Don't break anything in the house." It was around that time I started feeling something changing inside me. The constant fear was slowly giving way to another feeling, a silent, cold anger that grew each day. I started fantasizing about getting revenge, about making them feel what I felt. They were just thoughts at first, but they comforted me on the nights when I cried silently in my room, with pain all over my body. At 14 years old, I discovered that Richard had another side that nobody knew. I found by accident a notebook hidden under his mattress. It was full of disturbing drawings, animals being tortured, people suffering, and several drawings of me in situations of pain. It was as if he meticulously planned each torture, as if it were a hobby for him. I showed the notebook to my father, thinking that finally he would understand the gravity of the situation. His reaction? He took the notebook, flipped through it calmly, and then looked at me. "It's just your brother's creativity. You should stop messing with his stuff." Then he returned the notebook to Richard, who that same night locked me in the basement for hours as punishment for invading his privacy. It was in the basement, on that dark and damp night, that I started planning my definitive escape. Not to another city, but from life. I thought about ending it all. I even wrote a letter explaining the reasons. But something stopped me. Maybe a last thread of hope that things could change. The next day, I tried one last desperate approach. I went to the nearest police station. I spoke with a police officer, told him about the abuse. He looked at me with suspicion, made some notes, and said someone would get in touch. 3 days later, a social worker showed up at our house. My father, who was always good with words when he was sober, convinced the woman that I was making up stories out of jealousy of my older brother. Richard played the role of the concerned brother perfectly. The social worker left, believing I was just a troubled teenager seeking attention. The punishment for seeking help was the worst up to that point. My father locked me in my room for an entire weekend without food. Richard came periodically to teach me not to lie about the family. When I went back to school on Monday, I could barely walk straight. The coordinator noticed and called me to her office. Once again, I lied, said I had fallen off my bike. Fear prevented me from telling the truth. At 15 years old, I met Matthew, a new kid at school who became my only friend. He noticed the bruises, the dark circles under my eyes, my always alert behavior. One day he insisted so much that I ended up telling part of the truth. He offered me help, said I could stay at his house for a while. For the first time in years, I felt like someone really cared about me. We planned everything. I would go to his house after school and we'd stay there until we found a more permanent solution. His father was a lawyer, could help me legally. On the agreed day, Richard showed up at school, said my father had been in an accident and was in the hospital. It was a lie, of course. As soon as we got in the car, he told me he knew about my plan. Someone from school had told him. Richard took me home where my father was waiting for me. It was the first time he himself beat me. He didn't just let Richard do the dirty work. "You want to destroy our family? You want to tell our business to strangers?" He yelled while his fists hit my face, my back, my stomach. After that, I didn't go back to that school. My father told the neighbors I was having private lessons at home. The complete isolation was the last straw. No school, no friends, no contact whatsoever with the outside world. My days were filled with household chores, constant abuse, and the oppressive silence of our house. At night, I lay in bed, hearing Richard and my father's laughter in the living room, drinking and watching television, as if I didn't even exist, as if I were just a ghost, an unwanted presence they tolerated out of obligation. At 16 years old, Richard started dating a girl named Amanda. She came to the house sometimes and seemed uncomfortable with the way my brother and my father treated me. Once I caught her looking at me with pity when Richard pushed me as he walked past me in the kitchen. For a brief moment, I thought she could be my ally, that she could convince Richard to stop or maybe seek help for me. One day, when it was just the two of us at home, I gathered courage and told Amanda about the years of abuse. I showed her old scars, recent bruises. She cried, said she had no idea it was that serious. She promised to help me. I felt hope for the first time in years. 2 days later, Richard entered my room in the middle of the night. Amanda had told him everything, worried about the toxic relationship between us. My brother was furious that night. I prefer not to detail what he did. I can only say I spent 3 days unable to walk properly. Amanda never came back to our house. Later, I found out they had broken up, but the damage was already done. It was during this period that something definitively changed inside me. The anger that was once just a seed began to grow, to take over every thought, every waking moment. I started to understand that nobody was coming to save me, that the system had failed me repeatedly, that the only person who could change my situation was myself. I started preparing myself physically, mentally. I began doing push-ups and sit-ups hidden in my room. Not to defend myself. I knew I would never be a match for Richard or my father in a fair fight, but to be ready when the opportunity arose. And I knew it would arise. Meanwhile, my father's behavior got worse. Drinking had become his permanent refuge after work. When he drank, he became even more cruel, more violent. He started calling me by my mother's name sometimes, in a disturbing alcoholic delirium, as if I were a distorted version of her. "You're weak just like her," he'd say. "That's why she died. Couldn't take the pressure." Richard, now 21 years old, was getting more and more unstable. I discovered he was using heavy drugs, which made his behavior even more unpredictable and dangerous. There were days when he simply ignored me, as if I were invisible. Others when he seemed to need to hurt me to feel better. I started noticing a disturbing pattern. My father actively encouraged Richard's behavior, as if he were using my brother as a weapon against me. "Show him what it's like to be a real man, Richard," he'd say, "or your little brother needs another lesson today." It was like it was a sick game for them. In my head, I drew elaborate escape plans. I thought about stealing money from them, running away to another state, changing my name, starting a new life. But I knew they would find me. Richard had friends everywhere, including some in the police. My father knew truckers all over the country. I would just be a runaway teenager without resources, without support. Each day that passed, the pressure increased. I could feel something forming inside me, like a storm about to explode. I had nightmares where I was the aggressor, not the victim. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, scared of my own thoughts. Part of me was afraid of becoming like them. The other part was starting to accept that maybe this was the only way out. At 17 years old, I was unrecognizable. The cheerful boy I once was had completely disappeared. In the mirror, I saw only empty eyes, a face too thin, pale, with small scars that told stories nobody wanted to hear. I barely spoke anymore. I moved through the house like a shadow, trying to be invisible, doing my chores in silence, avoiding drawing attention. But internally the anger boiled. Every insult, every punch, every humiliation was carefully archived in my mind. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up long ago, replaced by a cold and calculating hatred that scared me and at the same time kept me alive. The day everything changed started like any other. It was a Saturday, June 2023. I had just turned 17. My father was home. He wasn't traveling that week. Richard had spent the night out, probably using drugs with his friends. The house was silently tense, as it always was when my father was around. I spent the morning cleaning the house, as was my obligation on weekends. I vacuumed the floor, washed the dishes, took out the trash. My father sat in the living room the whole time, drinking beer and watching a football game. He barely looked at me, except to point out areas I had left dirty or to demand I bring him more beer from the fridge. Around 2 in the afternoon, Richard arrived. He was visibly altered. Red eyes, unsteady walk. He had that smile I knew well, the smile that meant trouble for me. He threw his backpack on the couch and went straight to talk to my father. The two whispered something, occasionally looking at me. I felt a chill down my spine. That was never a good sign. "Andrew," my father called. "Come here." I went to the living room, keeping a safe distance from them. Richard kept smiling, that crooked smile that gave me nightmares. "Your brother told me you took money from his wallet yesterday," my father said, his voice too calm for my taste. "I didn't take anything," I replied, knowing that the truth didn't matter. It never mattered. "Are you calling your brother a liar?" His voice hardened. I saw his hand squeeze the beer can until it dented slightly. "No, Dad, I just—" "Empty your pockets, Andrew," my father ordered, leaning back in the armchair. "Let's see what he's got hidden." Richard advanced toward me with that sadistic pleasure stamped on his face. He started frisking me violently, shoving his hands in my pockets, pushing me against the wall. Then, as if by magic, he found a $50 bill in my back pocket. A bill I knew wasn't there before, that he himself had placed during the search. "Look at this," Richard said, showing the bill to my father. "The little rat has money." "I didn't take that," I protested. "He just put it in my pocket." My father slowly got up from the armchair. His expression had changed. It was that expression I feared, a mixture of contained rage and something darker. "Besides being a thief, you're a liar," he said, approaching. "You know what happens to thieves, Andrew?" I instinctively backed away, but Richard was already behind me, blocking my exit. "I think he needs to learn a lesson he won't forget," Richard suggested, holding my arms. My father nodded slowly. "Yes. I think it's time to teach him how we deal with thieves in our family." What followed was the worst episode of violence I had suffered up to that point. Richard held me while my father used his belt. Then it was Richard's turn. They took turns as if it were a game, a sick spectacle that only they enjoyed. At some point, I managed to break free and ran to the kitchen. I wasn't thinking clearly, I just wanted distance. They came after me. Cornered against the sink, I trembled with fear and pain. That's when my father said something I'll never forget. "Go ahead, Richard. Show him what you learned from those guys at your gym. That technique you told me about." Richard smiled. "The one that keeps the person conscious but causes maximum pain." My father nodded. pouring himself another beer, as if he were just watching a TV show. That's the one. I want to see if it works. It was at that moment that something inside me finally broke. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The cold anger that had been growing for years finally overflowed. I saw Richard approaching with that sick smile, saw Dad sitting, drinking calmly, waiting for the show, and I knew that cycle would never end unless I interrupted it. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't calculated. It was pure survival instinct. There was a pile of decorative rocks in a vase in the kitchen, the kind my mother had placed years ago. I grabbed the biggest one the exact moment Richard tried to grab me. With a quick movement, I hit his face with all the strength I could muster. He staggered backward, surprised, his nose bleeding. My father jumped up, ready to intervene, but something in my expression must have made him hesitate. It was no longer the look of a scared victim. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You little shit," he growled, advancing toward me. "Now you're gonna see what's good." I was still holding the rock. I was panting, adrenaline running through my veins. When he approached, raising his fist, I reacted. I hit the side of his head with the rock. Once, twice, 3 times. He fell. Blood started spreading across the kitchen floor. Richard, still dazed from the previous blow, looked at the scene in shock. Our eyes met. For the first time in his life, I saw fear in his eyes. Fear of me. I looked at my father lying there. I didn't feel remorse. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt relief, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from, but at that moment I didn't care. Richard ran out of the kitchen. I heard the front door slam. He had fled. I stood there looking at my father's body, the rock still in my hand, covered in blood. It was only then that the reality of what I had done started to hit me. I didn't try to run. I didn't try to hide what I had done. I simply sat on the kitchen floor next to the body and waited. Part of me knew Richard would call the police. Another part didn't care anymore. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I was still sitting in the same place, the rock beside me. I didn't resist, didn't say a word, just let them take me. At the station, I finally spoke. I told everything, the years of abuse, the frustrated attempts to seek help, what had happened that afternoon. I showed old scars and recent injuries. A doctor was called to examine me and confirm the signs of prolonged abuse. The detective listened to everything in silence. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Why didn't you seek help before?" he asked. "I tried," I replied simply. Nobody believed me. The trial proceeded quickly. Being a minor and considering the circumstances, I was sent to a juvenile detention center, not a regular prison. Richard testified against me, of course. He denied all the abuse, painted me as a violent and unstable teenager, but the physical evidence told another story. The medical reports didn't lie. Still, I had taken a life. It didn't matter how much my father had made me suffer. I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The sentence was 2 years in the detention center with mandatory psychological counseling. The first days at the center were strange. For the first time in years, I didn't have constant fear. I didn't need to look over my shoulder every second. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night fearing what Richard might do. It was a kind of peace I had never experienced, even though I was detained. Inside, I met other young people with stories as heavy as mine. Some had committed much worse crimes for much less justifiable reasons. Others, like me, were products of broken family systems, of failures in the protection networks that should have supported us. The psychological counseling helped. Dr. Lucia, my psychologist, was the first person who really listened to me, who didn't judge me, who understood that my story didn't begin the moment I picked up that rock, but much earlier, in the small moments of terror I lived day after day. "You're not a monster, Andrew," she told me once. "You're a survivor." During those 2 years, I learned a lot about myself, about my anger, my fear, my capacity to resist. I finished my studies there with surprisingly good grades. I discovered I liked to read, to learn, things I never had the chance to explore in my father's house. I found out through social services that Richard had moved to another state. Apparently, after what happened, he developed a serious drug problem. Part of me felt it was karma. Another part felt a strange compassion. He was also a victim of my father, in some distorted way. A victim of a cycle of violence that came from somewhere. that didn't start with us. When I left the center 3 months ago, I had nowhere to go. Social services helped me find a small room to rent and a job as an assistant in a bakery. It's not much, but it's a start, a new beginning. Sometimes, like today, I come to this park and think about everything that happened, about how my life could have been different if my mother hadn't died, if my father had been different, if Richard hadn't become who he became. I think about what I did, and I still don't know if I regret it. I know taking a life is wrong. I know I should have found another way out. But at that moment, in that kitchen, I saw no alternative. It was him or me, and after years of being the victim, I chose to survive. The nightmares still exist, but they're different now. I don't dream anymore about Richard chasing me or my father beating me. I dream about that moment in the kitchen, about the blood, about my father's empty eyes. I wake up in a cold sweat but not screaming. It's progress, I suppose. I'm trying to build something new now, something that isn't defined by my past, by what I suffered or what I did. It's not easy. I carry the weight of my actions every day. I carry the weight of my actions every day. I carry the physical and emotional scars as constant reminders, but I also carry the determination not to let those years of horror define who I become. My current therapist, who I continue to see weekly, says the healing process isn't linear, that there will be good days and bad days, that the important thing is to keep moving forward, one step at a time. I try to hold on to that when the guilt and memories get too heavy. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if someone had believed me. If that teacher or the social worker or any adult had really looked, really listened. Could everything have been different? Would my father still be alive? Would I be a different person today? These are unanswerable questions. What happened, happened. I can't change the past. I can only try to build a different future for myself, a future where I'm neither victim nor aggressor, where I'm just me, whoever I am now. I never had contact with Richard again. I know through social services that he's alive somewhere in Oregon. Part of me is afraid that one day he'll come back for revenge. Another part hopes he's found help, that he's broken the cycle of violence just as I'm trying to break it. When I left the detention center, one of the conditions was to continue psychological treatment and maintain distance from my old house and any family members. It wasn't hard to agree to that. There's nothing there for me, just ghosts and painful memories. The judge who reviewed my case before release said something that stayed with me. He said, "Andrew, what you did was wrong, but what they did to you was also wrong. The difference is you're paying for your mistake, while they never paid for theirs. Justice isn't always just." Maybe he was right. Maybe there's no perfect justice in this imperfect world. Maybe all we can do is try to be better day after day, choice after choice. Today I work, study at night, and try to rebuild a life I never really had the chance to live. I have some acquaintances, but no close friends yet. It's hard to trust people after everything. It's hard to let someone get close enough to see my scars, to know my story. But I'm trying. I'm trying to believe that not everyone will hurt me, that not every authority will fail me, that not every older brother is like Richard, and not every father is like mine. On days like today, when the memories get too strong, I come to this park. I sit on this bench and watch people passing by. Normal families with normal problems. Children laughing, running, being children. The life I could have had. The life that maybe one day I can still have. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness for what I did. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself, but I know I deserve a chance to try to be more than the worst day of my life. More than the product of those years of terror. And that's what I'm doing now. One day at a time, one breath at a time, surviving, but this time on my own terms. If you made it this far and understood what I went through, if you felt a little of what I felt during those dark years, I ask you to like this video, subscribe to Traumatic Accounts to hear more stories like mine, turn on notifications so you don't miss any testimony, and comment what time it is where you are while you watch this. It may seem like a strange request, but I want to know at what moment of your day you stopped to listen to my story, whether it was in the morning, afternoon, or late at night when the darkest thoughts usually appear. I'm not telling my story seeking sympathy or justification. I'm telling it because maybe somewhere out there is another Andrew, another boy or girl suffering in silence, thinking there's no way out. And if that person is watching, I want you to know, seek help. Keep seeking until someone listens. There are people who will believe you. There are ways out that don't involve violence. There are possible futures beyond the horror you're living through now. As for me, well, my story continues to be written. I don't know what the next chapter will be, but I know that for the first time in my life, I'm the one holding the pen. Amen.